Okay, I'll call the regular council meeting to order and recognize that we do meet on the traditional territory of the LHTAKO DENE. You'll note that as of last week, a new ministerial order was issued. And so we're meeting under now a revised ministerial order. And that ministerial order did give us some direction around public hearings. So you'll see a change in the ministerial order number because the previous one was repealed and replaced by the new one. And we don't have any scheduled public hearings coming up, but we do have an item on our agenda where we do have an individual who wrote us a letter of concern. So we'll just deal with that when we get to that. With respect to the agenda, I believe it's complete. No additions, deletions, errors, or omissions. So if I can have a motion to approve the agenda. Councillor Vic, Councillor Elliott. Anyone opposed? Okay, that motion is passed. And I think we'll just use that anyone opposed. It's just the easiest and cleanest way to go forward. And then adopting the special electronic council meeting minutes of April 21, a motion to adopt. Councillor Roodenburg, so moved. Councillor Goulet, anyone opposed? That motion has carried. Moving on to committee reports, again, just a verbal information only update from the Cariboo Regional District. We continue to meet as both a regional hospital district board and a regional district board using electronic means. And of course, because of where directors live, we don't have the luxury of video, so they're audio meetings. And you can see that we're still trying to do our regular business and including some of the support programs for things like community halls and so on. Nothing really to report out there. At this week, we do have a meeting where, as a hospital district, we'll be getting some updates on the two big hospital projects and whether or not they're sliding because of the COVID situation, but pretty much business as usual. Are there any questions or queries from the CRD board highlights? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. And Councillor Vic is going to give us an update on the North Cariboo Seniors Council, and in particular, a request for funding to council. Councillor Vic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few items to discuss today. I'll start off, and Mr. Mayor, you can jump in there, especially was pertaining to the quick meeting that we had last week, just with a few members of the council. But anyway, I'll begin. So we had the North Cariboo Seniors Council met with the city on the 21st of April. It was a great conversation just to see where everyone's at and more of a check-in. We also clarified just some logistics of communication between the city and the council. As I'm going to go through now, we're going to see that this council is very motivated and very aggressive in how they're chasing grants. And in a couple instances, the chasing of grants outstripped communication. So we discussed more frequent updates to the city of Quesnel with grant activity from the council. And I'll certainly endeavor to keep up with the council and make sure the city is well appraised of what's going on. And then as part of that conversation with the city that day, we also were asked to identify areas where the city might be able to provide some support, considering the council is new and is just finding its feet and may require some support. So the council did draft a letter, which I'll go through in a couple of minutes. So that pretty much summarizes the quick meeting we had with the city. And I'll follow that up with the actual directors meeting, which occurred the next day. And it was a fantastic meeting. I'll just give you some of the brief highlights. Most importantly, the NCSC now has a home located at Spirit Center or 246 St. Laurent. They were able to negotiate a sharing of office space with the Quesnel Downtown Association. So a sublet agreement was struck, of course, with the city of Quesnel signing off. And I can tell you that that move-in has occurred, and that's going swimmingly. I believe even today we have a phone number. So that's a huge, important step for this council, having a physical presence where in the future people will be able to come in and approach the volunteers or staff. It's really important to have that physical presence. The ability to even get to that point was the result of successful grant applications that the council made to Community Futures and the Community Foundation. And those two grants have funded the expenses of office equipment and whatnot. And specifically, the Community Futures grant will also fund basically any money spent on rebranding or branding the actual council with a logo, a little bit of advertising, creation of a website. So again, another really important step for the council as it moves forward is to have that presence and branding. The meeting also covered off grants that the council is chasing after in this sort of the next 90-day window here. Number one, the council, through the city of Quesnel's application, the council is named as a key partner. The city of Quesnel was successful in its UBCM Age-Friendly Stream 2 grant, and that $15,000 grant will see Anna Rankin continue on as the coordinator, and she will head up the activities of that grant. And specifically, as a reminder, that grant will help the community understand where opportunities are available for seniors to live, available apartments, assisted living, the whole gamut of available spaces today. So it will create a living database where the community can access it. So if they need help finding space for mom or dad, they'll have a resource to do that. Additionally, other grant opportunities have also been applied for. The Imagine grant will help us with getting seniors active through rec center passes. And then there's 2 United Way grants that the NCSE applied for, both through the United Way, both pertaining to food security and food sustainability for seniors. And the council will keep the city appraised of their success with those grants. And then lastly, as a result of the meeting with the city on the day prior, the council felt it was a good idea to engage in a degree of strategic planning to make sure that fundamentally that the tenets of our age-friendly document are reflected in some of the activities of the North Cariboo Seniors Council. And to that end, a strategic planning session will actually occur tomorrow. And I'll be participating in that, and I'll keep the city of Quesnel and council appraised of that. So that summarizes the 22nd meeting. And then lastly, I'll report on the item that I was asked to ask the council to articulate maybe some of the needs they have of the city of Quesnel, understanding that this is a new group that was more or less spawned as a recommendation of the Age-Friendly Initiative. And this new group, although it has been very successful getting grants to kickstart their development and their starting, there are major items which they would certainly like to see some help. So in your package, you will have seen the letter from the North Cariboo Seniors Council, and I can just skip right through the first part and get right to the meat and potatoes. They're looking for some assistance with insurance. That's a costly item that all nonprofits must bear, and that's to the tune of about $1,000 per year. And again, that's an expense that's quite heavy for this new group, especially in its inaugural year. The next expense is obviously the rent costs they will bear for the year. Although I would say that they got a very good negotiation with the QDA, it's still $100 plus GST a month. That's $1,200 a year, which wouldn't have been covered in any of the initial grants from the community that they did receive. And then the last item there is the $1,240 for phone and website domain expenses. Again, those expenses would normally be paid for through some degree of fundraising or whatnot. And obviously at this juncture, there's not a lot of opportunity for any fundraising. So I would present this letter and maybe seek a motion of support for this, or Mr. Mayor, if you have another process, how we can handle that. That more or less concludes my report.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I would just add a couple of, you've embedded it in your report, Councillor Vic, but just a couple of nuances for council. We actually asked in a meeting that we had with senior staff, myself, and the executive of the North Cariboo Seniors Council, we actually asked them to ask us to cover at least the first year of their expenses. So this is at our initiative. The logic for that is that they really are a function of an initiative owned by council. The Age Friendly Initiative is a council initiative. And we worked very hard with the disparate seniors groups in our community to bring this single council together. And they're taking on the responsibility now for what we own as an age-friendly strategy and action plan. And as a consequence, one of the things we didn't take into consideration as we mapped out the transition from a council committee, a city council committee, to a standalone council for seniors is that transition phase of getting insurance and getting a space and getting all of the things you need to have a presence. It's quite potential in future grants that they will be able to start getting their own base funding and take this off. But I think to unburden them this year so they don't have to sweat that, they can just get on with the work that they're doing, I think was appropriate. So we actually invited them to articulate what they saw as their base funding. The other piece that council should be aware of is we require the insurance. Go ahead, Carrie.
Just to clarify on that, we actually require general liability insurance. So this is asking for director and volunteer liability insurance, which is different. Most nonprofit groups have both. Yeah,
so we'll clarify that because, and I noted that, but that's kind of something that we'll just make sure we clarify if we're going to fund them, they're getting the right insurance.
They probably need both,
Go ahead.
If I could on that issue, Director Norburn's actually be working with them. He thinks they actually got the right insurance, and this may just be a bit of a typo in the letter, but he's going to confirm it with, I believe he is working with Sally. So
on the call we had with them, it was clear the insurance that we needed, and they were working with Jeff or Director Norburn on that. So just to be clear, we required that insurance in order for us to sign off on our resolution for grant funding or to flow dollars through us, which we'll do in some of these cases. And then the final piece I think that council should consider is an ongoing relationship with this group. We have ongoing relationships with other groups that we believe are important to the community. So I think for budget 2021 and beyond, we should take a look at whether or not we want to have that kind of financial ongoing relationship with this particular group. But for now, to Councillor Vic's comment, I think council resolution, if council is interested, to use council initiatives funding for this first year would be appropriate. It's an appropriate use of that fund. Councillor Runge, I see your hand up.
Thank you. And thank you both Councillor Vic and you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to propose a motion that out of council initiatives, we support the North Cariboo Seniors Committee to the amount that they require there.
Okay, and Councillor Elliott, I saw your hand go up. Do you want a second and then comment?
Yeah, I have no problem with that. And the comment, I think, Bob, you covered off where I was thinking about going. I have no problem with backstopping them for this year, for sure. And I know the importance of it, and it's kind of a council driven thing, but I think if we're going to be asked to support in future years as well, I would think that we should take it out of council initiatives, is what I'm understanding you're saying, for next year, and have a budget line or something where, so that we don't have groups coming back and us going backwards into the position that we were in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that Finance Committee should be given some direction to look at a long-term relationship with this particular group, because it is a child of City Council and it's serving a very important function for us. Councillor Paul?
Yes, thank you. And since this, as you characterize it, is a child or a function owned by the city, I just have to question why they wouldn't be eligible to be included under the city's umbrella. And then I have a couple of other questions as well.
Because they are a standalone society. So because they have a standalone legal status, they can't come under our insurance. They have to have their own. Okay, so that's sort of analogous to the Friends of the Museum, is it? That they're sort of at arm's length? Yeah, yeah. I mean, if they have their own legal entity, then they have to be covered for any liability against that legal entity, and we can't cover that. Okay. Second question, and I'll be voting in favor of this, but I need to ask these questions. Is this $3,500 grant eligible? So that's what I'm saying just now. I think in the future, COSCO, the Provincial Council for Seniors, age-friendly designation does cover, and some of their grants, some base funding. This group just came into existence this year, midstream. And so as they get mature, they may be eligible for base funding grants. But as of just now, the grants that are open to them, and I'd look to Councillor Vic to clarify, but the grants that are open to them don't cover base funding, they cover program funding. Is that correct, Councillor Vic?
Yeah, that is correct. So to answer Councillor Paul, other seniors councils and other communities, they receive a huge part of their operating funding through two ways. They have a relationship with the municipality, and in the example of Prince George, the city of Prince George does offer them a very modest base funding every year. A lot of the funding comes from gaming. So every year, seniors councils in various places apply for a gaming grant, and that helps fund some of their operations. Now, because this is a new venture, they could not have qualified for gaming this year, and in fact won't apply until next year.
And finally, since they're asking the city for this support, are they also asking the regional district for any help?
Councillor Vic?
That's a great question, Councillor Paul. I guess the first baby step in that is we've invited the CRD to, as I am the liaison to this council, we have asked them to nominate a liaison as well. And we just haven't had the timing work out well. And then with the COVID disruption, we just haven't had that first introduction, but that's a great topic, and that is on the agenda.
Well, good, because I'll be voting in favor, but it will be at the risk of the regional district saying, well, okay, you guys are handling this, so you might as well just continue, but I hope that's not the case.
But Councillor Paul, as a long-term councillor and as somebody who's been involved in this for a very long time, you ought to know that the regional district does not have tax flexibility. They can only fund what is eligible under referendum or in an already pre-existing fund. And so I don't think an age-friendly group would be designated under, the only fund that I can think of that they may have access to would be their economic development fund. So I think that, again, we've been through this. It's part of the issue of the rub between the city and the CRD. But as a council, we've talked at length, is we just have to realize the CRD does not have the tax latitude that we do as a municipality. And we got to be crystal clear. And I think, Councillor Vic, I think, to be respectful to the Seniors Council, they also need to understand that, so they don't feel like we're playing our tax flexibility against the CRD's lack of tax flexibility. If the CRD says, we're sorry, we can't fund you, it's because they can't fund them, right? But they can certainly help with grants or whatever the case may be. So
yeah, fair enough. What I was referring to in response to Councillor Paul was, I believe opening the door and having them present. This is the North Cariboo Seniors Council, so it's appropriate that they're at the table. And you know what? I'm sure those conversations will occur.
Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you. So what might end up being an appropriate ask of the CRD in the future is opportunities to participate in specific projects. So where they might be able to use their economic development money, et cetera. So there might be opportunities in the future to make specific asks of them around projects, et cetera. So there, like you said, you always keep that door open, even though you know they don't have the same kind of funding that we do.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to suggest that requests shouldn't go into the CRD. I just think that a new group shouldn't be set up to think that the CRD is the same as the city and would have the same tax flexibility that we have as we're doing tonight, right? That's all. They may still be able to find creative ways to fund certain projects or to help them out, but it's not because they've got the same capacity to provide funding on a vote of council. Okay, Councillor Paul, last kick of the can, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I respect all of that. You know, but the question has to be asked, and I guess this goes to my long-time dream that will probably never happen in my short lifetime, but that is that it would be great if we could have a regional municipality.
And since we don't have one, let's take a vote as a council on municipal money for this group. So on the motion to provide $3,500 from council initiatives this year. And then if I can look at the mover and seconder and have finance committee look at the 2020 budget and beyond if there's long-term financial support implications. Martin and Scott, you good with that? Okay, so on that motion, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Vic, for your work on this file. I think it's a really important one for us. Okay, moving on then to the first agenda item from staff on the financial plan and tax rate bylaws. And so as chair of Finance Committee, I'm just going to do a little bit of background to this. That's in addition to what Director Bolton has put in front of us. So as with all in this meeting will be made available to the public tomorrow. It's one of the benefits of having Zoom is that individuals who do want to take a look at the proceedings of council will be able to do that through a link on our website tomorrow. It's going to be the same with strategic plan. Often to the public, we do a disservice to them because we come to a vote on a pretty big substantive item and we often don't give all the background on it. And strat plan, we've done all the work, but it's just coming to a vote tonight. So with respect to this, I think it's important for us all to be reminded that the work we do on budget is a sharp pencil work every year. There's not a lot of fluff, if any, in our budget from year to year. And as a council, we actually try and project the out years. So we don't just do the single year. We actually try and put a tax framework together. And so this year's budget is in that context of a 4-year tax framework that we've done a lot of work around. Embedded, as you'll see in Director Bolton's report, we're trying to continue to wean ourselves off of the industrial taxation. And in particular, this time we're targeting light industrial. So some of the tax increase and the shift into the various tax classes will be coming as a result of us shifting how we collect our taxes around. The overall tax increase is 5.5%, but how that's felt at residential, industrial, commercial is going to be different, especially as we move more taxation onto residents over the years. The budget that we have at 5.5% could have been a lot higher had we not done the proactive work that we did on the tax stabilization account and we're able to mitigate the loss of $400,000 from TOCO starting this year. So that's a direct hit, about $2.5 tax increase if we wanted to cover it all in 1 year. We're able to mitigate that because we had a tax stabilization account, and we're using that to moderate that hit over the next 3 years, but we'll be drawing that account down. The other piece on the increase, and again, council's looked at this, is if you look at the actual increase itself, it's very strategic, very deliberate, and very necessary. So as a council, we've taken the position, if you don't cover inflation, you're going backwards. A large portion of this tax increase is just covering inflationary costs. The other piece is to cover the desire that our public has expressed to us over 2 budget cycles to add more RCMP and bylaw officers to get on top of some of our public safety issues. We risk managed last year the potential of getting to a full complement of RCMP, and it caught us off guard because we got there. So this year we actually are going to fully fund the RCMP detachment, and we're adding more bylaw resources. Again, that's a very large chunk of this 5.5% increase. The other part of it is that we're actually going to tax for snow. We're still not where we need to be on the annual budget for snow. We were 30% over this past year. We were over the year before, but we have added a taxation function to put in a snow reserve to try and buffer the vagaries of whatever happens with snow over the years. The other pieces around this are pieces that we needed to add for a variety of reasons. So for example, we've added an IT person because we have all kinds of system-wide enterprise issues, not the least of which now is getting into things like corporate security and identity theft. And as we saw from Dawson Creek, people being able to hack into our system and hold us at ransom. You just need different tools. The landfill needs to be managed differently. We've just got a lot of pressures there, but that's a small portion of the tax increase. But it speaks to one of the issues that we've got with respect to revisiting the budget, which I'll get to momentarily, in that we're now into May. A portion of what we increased taxes for, we've already implemented, and we can't go backwards on. So embedded into the budget is adding an IT person. Well, that IT person has been hired. So when you go and try and look at revisiting, can you get your taxes down because of COVID, you have to take into consideration we're midstream in our actual expenses that we've incurred. We're not at the beginning of it. So there's some areas where we don't have latitude. The other piece that, again, we did take a good look at is whether or not the issue that we've been presented with COVID, we can obtain potentially some savings by changing some of our operations midstream. We haven't brought some of our casual employees back. We haven't, done some of the work that we had planned on doing, and won't do that through the summer. But against that backdrop, we're not getting casino funds, we're not getting transit funds, Central Mountain Air is not flying into the airport. We've got a lot of unforeseen cost pressures and lack of revenue in our budget too. So one of the principles as a council we've taken is we need to make ourselves whole first before we start talking about tax reduction. All of our directors have been given direction that if they don't need to spend, they shouldn't be spending. But for the most part, that's going to cover off the internal dynamic of loss of revenue and increased costs as far as we can project forward anyway. That calculation suggests that there was potentially some room in the budget around a 1% that we could relieve on the taxation side, or about $180,000. But at a household level, that would be about $11 or so, and at a business level, it's about $14 or $15. So again, we asked the question of would $11 on an average household mean anything to the household, whereas with $180,000 that we could use to hedge against potential tax loss next year if we lose businesses or a mill, or against costs that we don't know that we're going to incur because of COVID, or against the possibility of being more strategic in our community and offering help. The one area we did as a council take a look at is whether our capital program could be adjusted to create some relief on the capital side, because we couldn't see relief on the operating side because we run our operating budget so tightly. So we do have some work that we can do around our capital side, particularly on our road program. There's new technologies on road maintenance, road rebuild, and rehabilitation. But as we look at that, and it could give us some relief on a big project like Lewis Drive, for example, but we don't know what we don't know at this point. We don't know if the relief is real or not. And in order to get that relief, we would reduce taxes this year, but we would raise taxes in future years and have to do catch up. We also had to take into consideration that in our capital plan going forward, we had to take money from sewer and water reserves in order to deal with an overage on public works. So we actually had to write down reserves and unallocated surplus to make sure that we could afford that project given the price escalation on that project. And we've added buildings into our capital reinvestment, and we haven't actually done the long-term capital work on what that means financially. So we could do something on the capital side to get some relief, but we would be risking having to come back to the public and topping up that capital reinvestment reserve with tax increases into the future, and again, for nominal relief. The other piece that council also explored is the idea that giving tax relief is a blunt instrument. And I don't know, council members, if you've gone around town, but we have very, very good news stories in our community, and we have very, very bad stories in our community. Giving tax relief rewards all of the folks who are thriving and actually making record profits and sales during this period of time at the same level as giving people a little bit of relief who are having a catastrophic time as well. It's a very blunt instrument. And if you look at how taxation breaks down, you aggregate all of your relief to your highest property valuation on all the categories. So our big box stores, our big grocery stores, our big land holdings on the commercial side get the lion's share of whatever relief we're giving. And most of those fit in the category of good news stories during COVID, not bad news stories. And the same holds true on the residential side. You don't get at renters on the west side who are potentially being hurt, or middle income earners who have, a nominal or an average household value with tax relief. You actually give a lot of tax relief to people who have most likely maintained their employment during this period of time. So at council's revisit of the budget, where we looked at all options, including labor options, including government to government relations, we took the opportunity to revisit all of those things and came up with wanting to see this report in front of us today, which is a hold the line report. To take the work that we've done on the budget, which we've all approved, so the budget's already approved, and turn that into our budget bylaw. So the decision you have in front of you as a council now with Director Bolton's report, which she'll go through, is to turn our approved budget into the budget bylaw. And we have the opportunity, because of the ministerial order, to do all readings tonight so that we finalize this tonight. There won't be a gap between first, second, third reading and final reading. Okay, so that's the context. And one of the things that we've suggested is if we do accrue some savings over the course of this year, that we would repurpose our current tax stabilization reserve into a tax and community stabilization reserve, where we could take some of the funds that we would save and target strategically some assistance into our community for the not-for-profits and others, and as much as possible, some business assistance, whether it's through enhanced marketing or through bulk purchasing of PPE, etc. So if we do accrue savings, then we would be able to put it to something that actually helps the community out more strategically. So that's where we left off in our last discussions. That's why the report's in front of it is the way it is. And I believe I see Councillor Roodenburg put her hand up. No? You okay? Okay. So I'll let Director Bolton go through the report.
Sure. So the purpose of this report is to seek the first 3 readings and adoption of the City of Quesnel 5-year financial plan bylaw 2020 to 2024 and the City of Quesnel tax rate bylaw. So this financial plan has been built based on council strategic initiatives and feedback from the public requesting more RCMP and bylaw services. In addition, a new separate tax rate has been created to create a snow reserve to create a buffer for high snow years. The council also approved working towards moving light industry mill rate to be the same as the commercial business rate. So over the next few years, light industry will see a reduction in their property taxes each year. The average residence in Quesnel, valued at $221,283, will see an increase of $70.84 in the municipal tax portion of their property tax invoice, or $32.01 per 100,000 of assessment. A commercial business will see an increase of $116.04 per 100,000 of assessment, which will be offset significantly by the reduction in the school tax provided by the province. And the report does include a summary of the effect to the average resident and a commercial business. So, of course, in March, COVID-19 crisis began, and it's affecting us in numerous ways. But as the mayor mentioned, we're working at ways to offset all the loss in income with reducing some of our spending. City staff has made recommendations of some of the projects we should delay, and that's been included with this report. And city staff will be continually reviewing the budget as the year progresses, and if further adjustments are required, we'll return to the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee with options. Council has approved moving the taxation due date to September 30th for all classes. The city will be borrowing from its capital reserves for operating expenses in order to do this as allowed by the province during the crisis. So the recommendation is that council proceed with the first 3 readings and adoption of the City of Quesnel Financial Plan Bylaw No. 1887 of 2020 in the bylaw section of the agenda, and that council proceed with the first 3 readings and adoption of the City of Quesnel Tax Rate Bylaw No. 1888 of 2020 in the bylaw section of the agenda.
Okay. Councillor Elliott, you're making that motion on the recommendation, okay? And again, we'll vote the bylaws in the bylaw section. This is just voting on the recommendations to proceed. Seconder. Councillor Runge. Okay, again, I just want to remind you, if you do put your hand up, it has to almost come in front of your face for me to see it. If it's off to the side and stuff, I don't see it on the screens there. So I have Councillor Elliott moving, Councillor Runge second. Open for questions or comments. Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect, I shall be voting against this budget, and with the leave of the chair, I'd like maybe a minute and a half to explain my reasons.
So, Councillor Paul, as you ought to know, you have the floor as long as you're making a meaningful contribution. So,
okay, I just wanted to be clear on that. So, while I appreciate our need for tax increases to offset decisions for things like increased bylaw and RCMP, and for the loss of our industrial tax base and reduced revenues due to COVID, my opinion is that we are not going far enough to reduce this year's tax increase of 5.5%. In past elections, and Mr. Mayor, I thank you for bringing up my word fluff, because I campaigned on sorting the fluff from the stuff. And by that, I mean non-essential discretionary spending from essential non-discretionary spending. And I think that if there was ever a time to sort the fluff from the stuff, this is the time. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that we hit the reset button, only the pause button. At this time, we need to leave as much in the local economy in the pockets of our taxpayers, because we've got taxpayers. Yes, there are some taxpayers out that are doing well, but we've got a pile of taxpayers that are not doing well. And I'm simply saying that by simply pausing, say, 400 to 500,000 in taxation from general operating and or capital reserve, and I would lean more to probably totally pausing 400 to 500,000 from capital, we could cut our tax increase roughly in half. And I acknowledge that, that this does not include recreation, CRD, hospital, school, and other taxes that we cannot control. I don't think that we should be, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that we are, but I don't want us to be seen to be rationalizing any of our own tax increases in view of decreases and or COVID relief programs that are being granted by senior governments. And I'm sort of looking specifically at the school tax decrease granted to commercial and light industry. I don't know if I've got that right, but there is a significant tax decrease there on the school tax. I am in favor of helping our small businesses as much as we can. Pretty well all small businesses are home, how about this way? Pretty well all small business owners are homeowners, and they need their small business income to pay for their home taxes. So for these reasons, and with respect, I'll be voting against this motion.
Just for clarity, Councillor Paul, what would you consider in our capital plan as fluff?
I knew that that question would come up, and it's not for me. It would be very simple, and actually I've seen this done. No one knows better on what is essential and what is non-essential and what can be put on hold. No one knows better than staff. And I would look to, if that was a possibility, I would be looking to staff for some recommendations in that vein.
So Councillor Paul, if you think that our capital plan is fluff, why did you vote in favor of it when it was put in front of you?
I didn't, don't put words in my mouth, Mr. Mayor. I did not say that our capital plan was fluff. I said that simply that we could put some of those capital items on hold or on pause for the time being. I am not for a minute suggesting that we eliminate them totally.
So, Councillor Paul, what you actually said in the logic that you used was that we should get rid of the fluff, and that you think that there's about 500,000 in fluff we could take out of our budget. You didn't offer anything on the operational side as fluff. You stated explicitly that the $500,000 in fluff could be taken from our capital account. You're now saying that you don't think anything in the capital account is fluff and that it could be added back in, which means what you're saying, Councillor Paul, is that we will just have to tax back that amount next year. So you haven't actually offered to the ratepayer or to council anything of value, quite frankly. Councillor Elliott, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think you covered off my questions, with Councillor Paul. So you wanted to separate the fluff from the stuff. And the only thing that you pointed out to was taking 400 to 500 out of the capital. We've had numerous opportunities to bring up any kind of savings with nothing from you as far as any kind of reductions that you thought that we could look at in capital. This is in the 11th hour now. You're okay with us going up 2% with the inflation rate. You voted on that. You're in favor of bylaw and the RCMP. That covers off the vast majority. Unless you have something to offer, sir, I'm not exactly sure that we go back to staff and ask them for something when there was no direction in the first place from you.
And I would remind council, we are on a timeline. This is our last opportunity to do the budget. So the contention that somehow we can go back and revisit and have staff bring a report back doesn't meet the test that we've got a requirement to get this into law. Councillor Vic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This discussion was certainly difficult, and I certainly have reflected on this very carefully. At the core of it is, are we Do we offset some of the tax increase this year by dipping into reserves, or do we bear the tax rate as we discussed when we made this budget, which I wholeheartedly supported and participated in its creation. So in the end, I feel that there are two factors that can mitigate some of my fear, I guess, that we could face as the situation evolves. The two factors are, as Director Bolton has indicated, if further adjustments are required, there's nothing stopping us from pivoting and adjusting. And that's to quote the report right there. So if things go sideways, then I expect that we'll be able to pivot and adjust. The second item, which will bear in my decision here, is the modification of the tax stabilization account. And in the last few hours, I've been very encouraged that this stabilization account can serve a very valuable purpose. Not only meeting its objective, which is to stabilize in the event of a major tax shortfall, but offering some measures to support individuals and businesses in the event that support would be required. So I think on the whole, although I have trepidation that we should be reflecting caution, I think I'm going to be voting in favor of this. And I will absolutely, like every one of us, have a responsibility to, if identify if things are going sideways and further adjustments are required. I fully expect that we'll be able to do that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Other comments? I don't have hands up from other councillors. Councillor Roodenburg.
Thank you. I want to reiterate something that Councillor Vick said in regards to the tax community stabilization account. By putting some of that money into that, it's not only looking at our businesses, but it's also looking at our not-for-profits. We understand and we know that they are going to take a huge hit this year, as we have with our casino funding. When you look at any of the gaming grants that are going to be asked for this coming year, there is no gaming money per se from from casinos. So we're also looking at how we can support our not-for-profits through that stabilization account. So I think that is part of that good news story of what is happening in our community, and how as a council, we're going to be able to help our community move forward. I mean, those not-for-profit groups provide valuable services in this community. They're not just the Girl Guides and, groups like that. We're talking about groups that provide services to our seniors, to our, to all kinds of members of our community. So I think that's part of the good news story of what's coming out of this. And you're right, it is a tough decision. Like I'd listened to Dawson Creek's council meeting the other day, and they were questioned why they weren't able to do 25% across the board like Puskupi was able to do. And they said, here's what would happen if we tried to delete 25% off our tax base. That meant closing down the majority of their recreation facilities and all kinds of other pieces that the community expected to still be running. So this is a huge piece for us, and this is not taken lightly when we look at how we move forward with our taxes for this year.
Thank you, Councillor Roodenburg. Councillor Goulet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm voting in favor of this. I think we need to be cautious and move forward in a way and remain stable. I see some things maybe that we can tie on to if we have the ability to, as Councillor Vick said, to pivot and adjust. I think if we look at a key factor in here for me is what is the provincial government doing and the federal government doing to help municipalities, and a way to tie into that if there's anything that they're doing or if there's anything that's going to come down the pipeline. I mean, they've announced funding for other things, and I think that municipalities at some point are going to start to see something develop as we move forward, right? They're not gonna deny that to municipalities. And I just like the idea that we can, and we're able to make adjustments as we go, whether they be good, whether they be bad, and review this at some point. But we need to remain stable and continue business, and just in my view, right, continue with how we were. We already approved a budget which set out this. We're just moving through a process of getting it in there and now making it final.
Thank you. Councillor Runge.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think if anybody thinks that we made this lightheartedly, I think they're far off. And I really do want to ditto a lot of what the three previous councillors, Vic, Roodenburg, and Goulet said, because I think it's through the building of our tax stabilization account that we actually will be able to support some things that we currently don't know about. And then the other thing I wanted to say is I appreciate our directors, all of them that are, as they're looking at things, they're also considering the best interests and cutting where they can, if they can. And this thing, and that's a kudos to them. So, with that, this isn't an easy decision, but I was definitely a person who did not want to move any kind of taxation from a capital account into a future tax year. I'd rather take it now and hope, and have this safety, this other stabilization account to support us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Runge. And I was remiss because there is another issue on the capital side that we need to be conscious of too. And the city manager can report out on that, but it's another emergent situation, and it's a situation with Baker Creek and non-budgeted potential expenses that we also have to take into consideration. So maybe you could update council on where we're at with Baker Creek.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as far as Baker Creek is concerned, I have to say that it's actually quite early in the day to say what our final costs are going to be on that yet. However, the response costs to date are about $200,000 of spending. Of that, $100,000 is for the RIP-RAP program where we armored Baker Creek, $45,000 for the water main repair, $5,000 for a geotechnical review of one or two properties there on Hutchcroft, and $50,000 of other expenditures, including pulling the sweeps out of the river right at the bridge there, running pumper trucks to handle some of the sewage when the line was down. So about 200,000 K for immediate response costs. In addition to that, we have the costs of maintaining and operating that temporary sewer line. And that the rental on that temporary sewer line, it's about 1.5 kilometers, I believe, and a large pump, is about $30,000 a month. In addition to that, the other ongoing monthly expense is security for that. And so the security maintains a presence at the pump station itself, so no one's in there messing with the pump. And more importantly, that the pump doesn't shut down. If it does, there's a procedure so we get it back operational fairly quickly. In addition, they're doing tours of the actual pipe. The pipe, as you may be aware, runs right along the roadside, so it's fairly vulnerable. So they do maintain that, but it's $30,000 a month. So $200,000 initial cost, $60,000 a month to operate it. And that's on a going forward basis, where we don't know what that end date is going to be yet. And that end date is going to depend on the solution we come up with. And that's going to be the very expensive part of this whole process. So there's going to be two really expensive pieces left. Relocate, or not necessarily relocating, but getting the sewer line functional again. There's about 200 meters of sewer line what actually went into Baker Creek. That needs to be replaced, but where it was sitting is washed out. So odds are we will have to relocate that line. When I asked Director Coben the cost of that, he said he could not picture a solution for less than $1 million, and quite easily could be 2 million or more. And we're having, it's being looked at right now by engineers to come up with some of the options on that. The other big expenditure is that parts of Baker Creek still need to be riprapped. And particularly where there was the significant washout just below Hutchcroft, is still a vulnerable section of the river, or the creek. The creek goes around a corner at that point, so it will continually eat out that bank as soon as it gets high, right until such time as we get it protected properly. So that's going to be a very large expenditure. It's going to require probably some road building at the bottom, and then rip-wrapping as we go and dumping loads in and backing further onto the loads and dumping more. So very significant expenditure. And again, we don't exactly know what that is yet. It's being engineered, that solution. Why I bring those topics up is that we are unsure at this point in time if the disaster funding assistance, DFA, is going to come through and cover those costs. They haven't made that ruling yet. They're going to be hopefully getting to that decision point this week. We've had meetings with emergency management folks, and they say usually they come to fairly quick solutions. I checked with her again today, and she says there's no answer yet of whether the DFA will cover the funding for the rehabilitation costs. But even if they cover the funding, they cover up to 80% of the total. So the city is liable for 20%, and that could be 20% of 2 very large projects. So our share could quite easily be $500,000 or more. So again, we will bring more information back to council when we have it, but that's kind of what our preliminary look tells us at this point in time.
Yeah, and pertinent to our discussion just now, and I'm going to call the vote, is 500,000 at a nominal level potentially that we don't have in our budget. So it's more pressure on our capital reserves. So on the motion, if I can have a show of opposition. Councillor Paul in opposition. Okay, that motion is passed. We'll deal with the bylaw during the bylaw portion of our agenda. Okay, moving on next to staff reports. Development permit for Dragon Hill Road, Director Turner. Yeah, we're going to have a switch out here.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. This is going to be the longer of all my reports. The rest of them will be really short and sweet, but I do need to take a couple of minutes to go over these ones. This particular one is for a 4-unit commercial complex on a piece of property in South Quesnel. It's for a 4-unit commercial complex with an associated landscape material retail area. The applicant will be building this on 2 lots. These 2 lots currently consist of a smaller lot, which is shown in your front map there, as lot 1. And lot 1 is where the commercial building is going to be located. The second lot is the larger portion of the 2.25 acre total parcel, and it is achieved by Panhandle. We are going to require that the developer, and this is in discussions with the developers, it's sort of the best option for the developer as well, to consolidate those parcels prior to completing the building permit. What you're reviewing here is a development permit, variances for 2 types of variances, 1 for setback and 2 for varying paving requirements. And this is also going to discuss the requirements for the hillside hazard and geotechnical requirements. So again, the applicant is proposing to build the commercial complex, which will be about a 557 meter square complex that will include his business, which is going to be associated with the retailing landscape materials, as well as include 3 other spaces for rental. The subject properties the building itself will not be situated to face Highway 97, but it will be situated on the lot to be most visible from Highway 97. And I think as you'll see in the form and character position of this report, the developer is proposing a very nice looking building that will very much complement the South Quesnel entryway. The development permit is, well, we'll also talk about the facade characters, but I'm not going to go hamper on that too much because, again, the concerns is what I really want to talk about tonight. The variances, as if we skip to the variance section of the report on page 3, the applicant is requesting to, as I've stated, to vary the permit hard surfacing. You'll see in the plans proposed, the surfacing was only going to extend down, which is what is considered right now a partial way of what is the panhandle. It will not go right around the building, nor will it cover all areas of vehicle movement. This is a concern for staff, and you'll see that we have not recommended this just because of the type of facility that it's going to be is going to cause quite a bit of movement of materials, and we want to make sure that we are meeting dust control measures. So the second part of the variance is with respect to siting of the proposed facility. The complication here is that this lot where the proposal is going to be abuts a residential zone. When it abuts a residential zone, the requirements are that the setback is increased to 7.5 meters. The proposal here is to allow a variance to allow only 1.5 meter setback. Of course, we have variances because we want to look at those on a site in a case-by-case basis. The ortho photo that's attached shows the residential property as 1975 Dragon Hill Road. You can see the ortho of the building itself, the residential building, and as well the perspective of where the proposed building will be. Noting again that also it'll be abutting the other activities that are happening. We're not talking about use here. This is a permitted use. We're just talking about the variance in terms of the setback of the building. The applicant, or sorry, the neighboring property did respond to the notice that was put out and did object to the variance. It was noted by the applicant that this was the first time that they had heard about the proposal. And they were in opposition of that. They felt that they had very little time to respond. And they had very little information. And you know, their concerns were just definitely about being a new residential owner in that area and not being able to have been a part of a larger discussion. I do want council to know that applicants, including this one, are always told to go and visit their neighbors and have that discussion priorly. This applicant was told so a number of times, I don't know what I can do other than jumping up and down when telling them that they can really do themselves a lot of favors by doing that. I feel like that could have been the case here as well. I've informed the applicant that there is this a concern on the property, and I encouraged him to think of some solutions. So unfortunately, this meeting was already set. That's just the way this goes if they are not notified earlier on in the process. And this is where we are at this point. Staff still does support the variance, although we feel it's unfortunate that the applicant wasn't notified earlier. We support the variance, and as you'll see in my report, almost ironically, due to the configuration of the properties, including the neighbor's own bluff of trees that somewhat blocks his view of the development anyway. Unfortunately, the applicant did state, however, when I did talk to him, you know, that he would be interested in having screening. Doesn't love the idea of a wall, but if there is going to be a development, that a screening wall would be a preferred option. And that's why you'll see that as a recommendation in the full recommendations. I do want to note, so I'm going to move on from that. I'm sure you'll have questions on that variance later on. The hillside hazard DP area. This is in a hillside hazard DP area. There was a previous geotechnical report. That previous geotechnical report was done in the 1990s based on a residential subdivision that looks nothing like this development. The developer has been informed that he will need to do a new geotechnical report because the conditions or any of the discussion in the report have nothing to do with this development. And that I just want to address the process concerns. Developers often want to have some kind of understanding of whether a variance for siting of their building will go ahead before they invest in that geotechnical report, which is understandable. So that's why we're proceeding in this prior to having a report. Some of what you'll see in my recommendations revert to a geotechnical specialist that comes in may recommend to him to reorient things based on whatever reasoning. So I do note that, and I've warned the applicant the whole way along that if there is considerable changes due to geotechnical assessment, that we may need to come back and revisit some of these recommendations. Parking and access, we feel like the parking and access is fine, especially once the two lots are consolidated. For the type of businesses that are being recommended or sort of are being proposed. With respect to paving and drainage, there are some concerns with drainage in this area. We do want to have the geotechnical report deal with drainage. Again, I kind of wonder whether the geotechnical individuals will recommend some sort of paving anyway to get water out of this area. So. But I couldn't state that. I'm definitely not a professional. But again, I've noted to the applicant that the recommendations from the geotech could also make additional requirements beyond what we're doing today. Landscaping and screening. There's some landscaping and screening that's been proposed. We find it suitable for the development here. We will require the bonding for such prior to moving ahead on a building permit. Again, we think that this, the design of the building is quite impressive, and we are, think it meets all of the requirements for the form and character for the commercial area DP, and as such are recommending that. Now I'm going to go back to my recommendation, which I know you all love when we have this nice big long recommendation, but such as it is. So the recommendation is that council approves DP 2020-26 for the construction of a new 557.4 meters squared 4-unit commercial complex and associated landscaping material retailing area on lot 1, district lot 6681, Cariboo Land District Plan PPG 41067, and lot 4, district lots 6680 and 6681, Cariboo Land District Plan 6838. Excluding plans H697, 3071, and PGP 41067 as proposed on the attached plans. And these are the important points: subject to obtaining a geotechnical review of the property and development plans, registering on title the property, a geotechnical report stating that the development is safe for the use intended, and providing clear recommendations for conditions of development, speaking with the Ministry of Transportation regarding the Racing Road Improvement Project, providing final servicing plans for approval from the Building and Capital Works departments, providing grading and stormwater plans for approval by the city and registered professional completing the geotechnical report, consolidation of the 2 subject properties described above, the city receiving approval from the Cariboo Regional District regarding connection to the Red Bluff sewer system, obtaining a $12,500 landscaping bond as per the development procedures bylaw, providing specifications of proposed recycling paving material to the Capital Works and Public Works departments for approval, providing screening plan along with the westernmost boundary, and obtaining a development permit amendment for approval of any changes to site plan or building from form and character. And that council varies section 25.41 to permit the siting of the proposed commercial building of 1.5 meters from the western interior side property line, and that council denies the request variance for paving and requires that paving of all areas of vehicle movement parking must be hard surfaced. Any questions?
Councillor Elliott, are you making the motion on the recommendation? Councillor Vic, did I see your hand go up? No. Councillor Runge? Can I have a seconder then to the motion? Councillor Paul, is that a seconder?
No, I have a question, but I'll second it. For
Okay,
purposes.
so the motion's on the floor. I have a seconder. Okay, and then I think Councillor Runge, you had your hand up to comment. Is that correct? Okay.
Thank you. So I've just got, I guess, one quick question. For the subject, the person that was opposed to the written submission that was opposed, is their property also zone C4?
No, it is. No, it is residential. It's a CR1 actually.
And then beside them, because beside them we have then the vet clinic, and their zones.
C4.
There's a couple of residential properties up there, not.
But I guess what I'm coming to, they're embedded in between the two C4s on either side?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just so we're clear, there's more than one residential property up there. I think there's about 4 or 5 residential properties, and then the commercial properties. Okay. Councillor Paul, comment?
Yes, a question. Thank you. Regarding the requirement that basically, from what I gather, all of the area with the exception of the building footprint needs to be hard surfaced. And we're all aware of the fact that there are some commercial properties around town that are not hard surfaced. In fact, we even have one of our own parking lots that's not hard surfaced. So I'm wondering, is there any opportunity for some discussion as to how we can maybe make it a little easier for this investor?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First of all, so we are not saying the whole site needs to be hard surfaced, only the areas of vehicle movement, right? So that would be just the areas of where vehicles will be coming in and out of the lot and will be accessing the building. There is an area as well for the retail, for where I'm assuming trucks are going to be backing up to be loaded on and off for the materials. At this point, I would like to remain saying that should all be hard surfaced for the aspect of there's some drainage considerations, and obviously a facility up there with something like that and large heavy equipment going back and forth, there's going to be some mud, there's going to be some dirt, there's going to be some issues, right? I'm not even sure how you would do what they're proposing without surfacing. So I would suggest we do that now. What I'm going to recommend to the proponent is that when they have their geotechnical professional reviewing all of this, that they also review and provide recommendations on how they can properly drain that area and properly surface that area for those conditions that will create a proper environment. Also, if they aren't going to surface it, I'm also making sure that they give us a plan for dust suppressant, and then we can bring that back for a quick amendment.
But just for clarity, the hard surfacing is our general requirement.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that's a general requirement, and councils have gotten themselves in trouble when you wax and wane on that general requirement. So some of the places that don't have hard surfacing that are highly problematic were, for the most part, in before that general requirement and continue to be problems. Campbell Crescent, there's some areas and so on. We've got an existing situation with the new vet clinic and West Road Consulting where they're trying to get away from hard paving. So, you know, councils can build themselves a bit of a nightmare if they wax and wane because they're concerned about this. So it's just something for us all to keep in mind. I have Councillor Bicken and Councillor Elliott, but Councillor Paul, you currently have the floor and it looks like you're not quite finished.
No, I just expressed the hope that I'm presuming that the same rules that apply for us with respect to the new public works facility would apply in this particular case.
Okay. Again, I think you voted on that, Councillor Paul. So if you didn't apply it then that's on you as well. Councillor Vick and then Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'm mystified, having been through something like this, why he didn't go and talk to the neighbor, or it appears maybe he didn't. Because yeah, looking at the diagram here, that's pretty darn close, and I can see why that neighbor is concerned. So tonight you're asking us to make a decision on this, having him not discussed it with the neighbor, and without any sort of contingency or other options, Director Turner?
Well, I guess what I've put as a contingency is that he installs that screening along the entire western property line. So basically,
but we don't know if that neighbor. Okay, sorry, but we don't know if that neighbor would be satisfied with that remedy, right?
Yeah, like as I stated in the report, the neighbor actually stated that he should do a wall and then not have the variance.
Oh, okay.
He actually wanted the wall, and he did want the wall and also not the variance. So just to be clear, I don't want to misrepresent him, but I guess I'm saying, yeah.
But I think the other piece that council should keep in mind, if you take a look at the aerial photograph, and I went up and actually looked at this property, the individual's house is actually buffered with their own shop that runs parallel to where the development is going to be. So they have a very large shop buffering their home from the property proposed to be developed. And then they have pretty substantive tree growth along the area that the actual physical building is going to be built. And none of the activity that's going to occur is on the back end of the building abutting the residential lot. It's all going to have a building between, right, the actual driving and so on and the individual's lot. So I think we need to take that into consideration as well. I think anybody who gets caught, and you can see there's a couple of residential properties there, as we'd indicated, anybody who gets caught beside a commercial lot that gets used to a nice treed lot for a long period of time and no traffic, and then you get a commercial developer coming along and actually wanted to develop the lot, you normally get shock and awe, even if the person's gone and talked to them. So I'm not excusing the fact that the person wasn't talked to, but I think there's some tree buffer and a shop buffer and everything else that we should also consider, notwithstanding the request to build some kind of buffer into the variance, right?
Okay, thank you. And then my last point regarding the hard surfacing, and he did make note that the reason why that wouldn't be practical in this case is the machines that he's going to be using to load material would destroy the pavement, I guess. Has there been any thought? Has he considered using alternate hard surfacing, such as cement, or I don't know if there's got to be other products there that could satisfy our requirement, yet not be destroyed after a couple of loaders scoop some lava rock there? Yeah,
and thank you, Councillor Vic. And actually, our requirement is just hard surfacing. It doesn't state a material. It doesn't say paving. It can be concrete. It can be anything that's a hard surfacing that would meet the test of hard surfacing. So that is exactly what I'm going to ask the developer to do within his final planning stages here. And I do believe, though, we do need the geotechnical professional to deal with drainage. Those two things are very closely tied. So I think that through that development and that consideration, there'll be some changes to the site plan anyway, and I'm just going to ask him to proceed with that on those notes. If his geotechnical professional, if they come up with something that's not hard surfacing but meets the drainage and the tests, then we can certainly come back and get that varied through council, make that amendment to it. I just don't know how that would necessarily occur. The vehicles will, the one issue is that the vehicles will be going from the material area and will also be going into his shop. Like, he does have a bay there for fixing his vehicles and stuff that is right next to the property too. Although I agree, it's probably buffered somewhat by their own shop. Okay, I have Councillor Elliott. Councillor Vic, you're good? Yep.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Basically asked and answered as far as the location and the lack of communication. Yeah, unfortunate, but yeah, it's been talked to death. You've covered it. As far as the pavement, okay, this might be a specific situation, as Tanya said, after the geotech comes in. Maybe there is a situation where it can be adjusted or a variance, but I'd caution that. I think we have, as a council, and to Councillor Paul's point, I get that we should be taking care of our own, and we're working on it. I think maybe you're highlighting a parking lot or something. I don't know, but I think that we have to kind of stay the course on this. If you vary it too many times, and we've seen it already, where we varied it, and then they're like, well, you know what? I'm not sure that we're going to do it now, and on. We've got to be very careful where we're going. I think it's the right direction to go to have them all paved up, but something to be conscious of as we move forward.
Okay, other councillors have comments? Okay, Councillor Paul for a second time.
Yeah, just a question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if the question is to staff, and this is a follow-up to your comment, Mr. Mayor, about the fact that if we'd allowed any concessions for hard surfacing at the new public works facility, I voted in favor of it, and it's on me. I just want to clarify that I'm going to ask if there were any concessions that were granted to us with regard to the public works facility, with regard to hard surfacing.
It's not relevant to the conversation that we have, Councillor Paul, and you ought to know the answer yourself. You were there for the vote, and logic was put in front of you. What we have in front of us just now is a development permit proposal that we're voting on. We're not voting on public works. So let's stick to the subject at hand.
There's
going to go to public works.
No,
Okay.
well, just to say that public works.
No. Okay. It's not relevant. So on the development permit that we have, any further comments or questions? Councillor Runge.
Thank you. So, Director Turner, my question then is to the final denies variance request for paving, and your comment with regards to if the geotech finds another hard surface that would work. Is there any way to word that so that it's understood? Like it's really based on the geotech study, I believe, right? Or that's my understanding.
Well, it's further to that, so I wouldn't want to put it into the words of saying that it's whether geotech can figure out another hard surfacing. It's in relation also to drainage, and drainage is a big concern on this lot. So if we really need to make sure that that's considered. So there's a number of different items with respect to that, including which we won't go into details because it will take too long, but we do need the geotech to identify drainage. So I think in that site planning that he does there with those considerations, they'll be speaking towards how it should be surfaced to make the drainage appropriate anyway.
Yeah, and my point was just that if the geotech finds that the paving doesn't work, I'm for this proposal, but that's I just want that being said, we can possibly have a different surface if it's required.
Yeah, so inherent in all of these, if you look at the subject 2, is a whole bunch of potential for something different to come back to council during this process. And in fact, I think as Director Turner stated a number of times, until we actually see the geotechnical review, we don't really know if we have a development here or not, or what the kind of development it needs to be to meet those requirements. So, but the proponent rightly isn't interested in going after the expense of a geotechnical review if we're not interested in some of the variances and things he's asking for. So this is just one of those negotiation clarity steps. What this may look like will depend on a number of factors. Okay. So on the motion then, anyone in opposition? Seeing none, that motion is passed. Thank you, Director Turner. Okay, switch bench seats there. Keep your COVID distance. Let's rock and roll.
Keep your COVID distance.
Okay. All right. Strategic plan, city manager to give a brief
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to suggest that this is such an important report that we go through line by line. Apparently, I received other directions. So, council, you should have all got an extra package, which is printed larger and in some color to it to make it easier to see. I would just, and of course, council, you've seen this a number of times already, with the last time being specifically to look it over, bearing in mind the COVID-19 pandemic. So that pandemic has changed a number of items in this plan and quite significantly, or delayed those items. However, the fundamental themes of this strategic plan remain the same, which are economic transitioning, housing, forestry involvement, and improving public safety. Those are the 4 key themes of this plan, what resonate in a number of different items throughout the plan. And I would actually suggest if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them, but you've seen this enough that other than that, I would just ask that council approves the strategic plan for 2020 to 2022. Thank you.
Okay, and again, as I indicated, even with our budget, we've done a lot of the work. This is just now coming to the light of day. So I'd invite a motion on adoption of strategic plan, then open the floor. Councillor Roodenburg, Councillor Elliott. Any further questions or comments on the strat plan? I think the reorganization the city manager's done has cleaned the plan up quite a bit. And again, I think even some of the conversation we've had in this meeting has been reflected in the strategic plan around the age-friendly designation, around some of our strategic initiatives post-COVID, et cetera. So I think we continue to track against it, even though it's coming public today. Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to go back to when we were discussing the budget and the term pivot and adjust came up. And in fact, I wanted to recognize that at the end, but you called the question rather quickly. And also the city manager has alluded to that too, that because of the COVID crisis, that a lot of what we are going to do and what we are going to be faced with is going to require some pivoting and adjustment, and I appreciate that.
Okay, any further comments or questions from council? Okay, on the motion to adopt the strategic plan, anyone opposed? Being none, thank you, and thank you to the city manager for tidying up and condensing the work that we did. Okay, next then, back to Director Turner. You guys are going to get your steps in today, just walking around in circles with each other.
That was my last report. I'm stepping right out of here.
Oh, there we go. Okay, 105 North Star Road development permit.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As I said, this is going to be quick. This is for the review of form and character facade update for 105 North Star McDonald's restaurant. It also includes variants for the number of signs. This the entire facade of the North Star McDonald's is going to be changed, including the roof structure and lines. And all of the cladding around the building is going to be changed and updated. We're actually quite excited about this. Even though technically the terminology does not apply to what some of the terminology we use in terms of sloping roof lines, etc., is probably moving more away from that with the current design. However, they are doing a number of other architectural features that are going to create contrast and visual relief in this building, including having peppers, I can never say that word, and I should given my job, but I can never say it. They're going to have a variety of building materials. Even the schematics you're seeing in color, you don't even see the what I think you're going to actually see when you're reading the colors and the building material changes. You'll notice when the building is actually up. They're also having, through their signage relief, they're also creating some other relief changes along the roof line as well. Staff is recommending approving the development permit variance and variances for the signs. And I'm just going to skip right to the recommendation. The council approved DP 2020-28 for the updating of facade of the existing McDonald's building located on Lot 2, District Lots 51 and 710, Cariboo Land District Plan 27750, as proposed on the attached plans. And that council approves varying section 2.3.2 of the City of Quesnel sign bylaw number 1852/2018 to permit a maximum number of signage per business frontage of 5 on the southeasternmost business frontage.
So on the recommendation, Councillor Runge so moved, Councillor Vic second. The only question, where's Ronald McDonald's statue? I don't see it in the facade improvement. Am I dating myself? I think that was the last time that I was ever in a McDonald's, when Ronald was alive.
He never died.
Oh, sorry, okay. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, on the motion, anyone opposed? Motion is carried, thank you very much. And you're gonna stay there because you've got another one coming up. So on to just an adjustment to the terms of reference for our Finance Committee, Director Bolton.
Yeah, so the purpose of this report is to request a change to the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee's terms of reference to include that they act as the parcel tax review panel when required. So whenever there's a new or significant change to a parcel tax review panel must consider any complaints and authenticate the role. This year, all residents formerly paying the first South Quesnel parcel tax will now be levied the city-wide water frontage tax as per Quesnel Water Frontage Tax Bylaw 1628. This affects 516 properties. We've sent out letters to all the properties, letting them know that their taxes will go down from a $520 parcel tax to about, on average, just under $200 water frontage fee. So the recommendation is that council approves the revised terms of reference for the Financial Sustainability and Audit Committee to include that the committee acts as the parcel tax review panel when required.
Can I have a motion to that effect, please? Councillor Vic, Councillor Runge. Any questions or comments? Anyone opposed? Thank you. That motion has passed. We should have sent that letter out with confetti or something, and so people actually understood that they were getting a big break in their taxes. So anyway, next then, and our final staff report is another development permit for Powell Road.
Right, thank you, Mayor. This is for a development variance permit to vary the maximum allowable accessory building footprint size. Please note that in South Hills, due to the change from country residential zoning to single family dwelling zoning, there is a change in the size allowable for accessory buildings. These lots, there is a number of very large lots that exist still in this area where the allowable size and area of an accessory building is still, the staff can still support the size of that accessory building. The applicant is intending a total footprint of 111.2 meters squared. Again, that would have fit into the previous zoning of CR2 or CR1, either one. And so was planning this development even prior to us doing the zoning amendments, and staff is recommending approval of the variance. We are looking at this as a possible area to look at amending in the zoning bylaw, allowing a change in allowable accessory building depending on the size of lots. There's a little bit to consider with that, especially when you want to consider if you want to have people subdividing and maximizing lots. Then if you use that, we're looking at how many lots this is going to impact and see if that's necessary or whether we should just keep it going on by variance. Let's just say that. The recommendation is that council approve DVP 2020-61 to vary section 11.3.8 of the zoning bylaw number 1880/2019 to permit 112.2 meter accessory building on lot 10, district lots 5442 and 7258, plan 15929 568 Powell Road.
So on the recommendation, Councillor Elliott so moved, Councillor Roodenburg. Any questions or comment? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you're looking at this kind of as a blanket, Tanya, for the area, because, you know, if they had it before and this guy does it now, I think his neighbors, if they want to go in that direction, you know, we want to try and expedite things and make it easier. And this is just something I think that's probably going to come back to us. So good on you for thinking ahead of the group here.
Okay, any other questions, council? The only question I had, I went and just took a look at this, and where he's doing the extension is towards the hydraulic road where there's the drainage ditch there. So he's actually, you know, building closer to where that water drains off. Now, I didn't get a chance to look at it when there was significant melt and so on, but I'm assuming that the foundation or whatever he's going to be putting in there would take into consideration that, you know, he is moving closer to where there's going to be either water movement or that drain, right? Would that be just up to him? He's got to take that into consideration. We're just looking at the space.
He should take that into consideration, but it is a point of good note to make to the building inspector as well.
Just to take a look at it when
absolutely.
you're up there. Yeah. I don't think, like, I think because Powell Road is there, I think a lot of the water drains off Powell to the lake. And he's right, you know, abutting that. So I don't think it would be a big issue, but the drain ditch is right there. So, okay. Okay, on that, anyone in opposition? Seeing no one, thank you very much, Director Turner. We have no SIP. Moving on to correspondence, I'll speak to them because I asked them to be put on here. The City of Prince George sent a letter around to other municipalities. I saw this at the Cariboo Regional District, and I think it's a fair point they're making. The province of British Columbia has announced that they're going to be taking a class action lawsuit with regard to the main pharmaceuticals with regard to the opioid crisis. As council should be aware, there's a settlement already down in the States on this of quite a substantive sum. And I think Prince George is being quite proactive in saying the costs of the opioid crisis have been borne by municipalities throughout the province. And if there is a settlement to this class action lawsuit, municipalities should be considered as potential recipients of some of that money. And we can certainly attest to the extra costs that we've had to incur as we've had to deal with some of these things, not the least of which is ramping up our own bylaw and our CMP, which is a big part of our budget this year. So I would invite a motion to receive the letter and send a letter of support to the same effect to the provincial government. So I see Councillor Runge, Councillor Vic. Questions or comments? Seeing none on the motion to send a letter. Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. And then the other one, I just asked, none of these are addressed to us because we were not the proponents, but it was to illustrate that the Cariboo Regional District in whole struck out, and of course we're a partner on one of these projects, on the Canada Infrastructure Grant Program. And LHTAKO DENE Cultural Centre was also not approved. Because of a holdup around COVID, and again, the federal government holding up announcements, we don't know what projects were approved this time. But I brought these forward so that I could get a motion from council to be able to draft a letter to the Premier and to the Prime Minister saying, your infrastructure grant programs do not work. And, you know, we've had a substantive conversation about our capital here. We have to plan our capital forward because we can't depend on the infrastructure programs. And we were in a position where, you know, we got denied, but if we had been approved for the pool project and if LHTAKO had been approved for their project, we weren't sure we could actually do the projects because 14 or 15 months had passed and the cost plus on construction is so high, we may not have been actually able to do the project that we submitted to them. So I think this is just an abject failure on the part of these infrastructure projects to actually get funds into communities. As soon as we know when the announcements are made of successful projects, we'll again take the list like we did last time and see who got funding and who didn't and to what scale, so we can do that analysis. But I think given there's now talk of COVID relief and infrastructure funding and support being part of COVID relief for municipalities, I think we have to make a very strong statement that they need to revisit their infrastructure program. It needs to be way more timely. It needs to be distributed in a much more transparent manner. And it needs to take into account the kind of exigent circumstances we're in. You know, after 2017 and 2018 fires, after 2019 meltdown in the forest sector, that the Cariboo struck out across the board, I think there's something wrong with this program. So if I could have a motion to that effect. I see Councillor Roodenburg, and I believe I saw Councillor Goulet. Questions or comments? Councillor Roodenburg.
So I definitely support this motion. And I had an opportunity just before COVID hit the fan there, probably the end of February, beginning of March, to speak with the Honorable Monsef, who's the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Rural Economic Development. And one of the things I spoke to her about, it was through UBCM, but we talked about these granting opportunities, and we talked about how, you know, when they lump what they consider small communities together, when they hive off, you know, how much small communities get versus, you know, the larger communities. When they talk about small communities, you do realize they're talking about 100,000 people or less, right? So, you know, that was part of the conversation, is how do you compare a community of 10,000 to 100,000 or 99,000, especially when it comes to these kind of grants and what it means to smaller communities. So it was one of those points that was really made with her, because it was she wanted to go on about the money that was available for rural development around cell service, etc. But we managed to get in a few of the other asks or discussions around these grants. And she says she would take it back, and unfortunately all this stuff has hit the fan. But that was one of the big points that we tried to drive home with them, is around the timing and how you lump us in with communities of 100,000 people as a small community.
Thanks, Councillor Roodenburg. Although the symbolism of COVID hitting the fan doesn't give people comfort. I'm just saying, blowing it all over the place is not the best thing. Okay, I have Councillor Vic, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have a long comment, but you use the term exigent circumstances, which begs the question, what is the score sheet for these projects? And, you know, how do they, obviously there's got to be a matrix on how a community is successful in a project. And for God's sakes, if in our situation, we in our region could not qualify for one project, I want to see the score sheet. I want to see how these things are judged. And it sounds to me that there needs to be a revision in how that works.
And so just for the edification, particularly of the new councillors, the last time the rec center project was denied, we took a very hard look at all of the successful projects, and it was shocking. You know, even against, because we don't get to see the scorecard, we get some indication of how they may score based on the material that comes out to describe the application process or the window. And in that last go around, there were some statements about that municipalities or regional districts had to have their funding aligned, that projects should not have hurdles of approval in the way. So they basically intimated that one of the key scoring aspects would be that your project was truly shelf ready. If you needed other funding, it was available, and there wasn't going to be, you know, a referendum or, you know, some community pushback. When we looked at that, Victoria, Penticton, Nanaimo, there were whole communities that hadn't even done the rudimentary work to qualify for any of that. And Penticton actually didn't even know where they were going to locate the project that they had submitted. Nanaimo indicated that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans were opposed to their project. Victoria had multiple council votes where they had voted the project down and voted the project up and voted the project down again. And they all qualified for funding. And we had a shelf-ready project that we could have done immediately, and we had all the permissions in place ready to go, and we didn't get it. And it was less than all of those other projects I named. So we would love to see, and staff met. We had conference calls with UBCM. Staff met with UBCM here in City Hall. And at the end of that, I'm looking at the city manager, but at the end of that, I don't think we were any more clear after those meetings on how they make decisions.
And if I may add,
Yeah.
they never were willing to release the actual score sheets of how they ranked the various projects.
Yeah.
Leading one to believe there was some political element to the ranking.
Yeah. The city and regional district of Nanaimo, I think, got 4 funded projects.
Yeah.
And they told us that they had to take in geographic distribution because, you know, the funds always oversubscribed. And we said to them, so how the heck does Nanaimo and the regional district Nanaimo get 4 then, if you're taking that into consideration, right? So anyway, it's a frustration for us, as you can tell. Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And most of my thoughts were covered off there. The frustration is unbelievable, especially when you look at some of the projects that were allocated, you know, given the go-ahead, and then you look at the cities that just didn't have the money. They didn't do the work behind it to begin with. So beyond advocating, beyond lobbying, and everything you said about going to the feds and the province and UBCM and I think maybe just the thought of when we're applying for any grant in the future here, just a precursor, a preamble of, look, this is where we're at now. This is where we've been in the past, and we need this funding, not just as a blanket to them, but for everything we're doing as just kind of a header letter. We've been through some tricky times, and any help you can give us would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thank you for that. We, on a conference call we had with the MP Doherty on Monday, the mayor's from his riding, MP Doherty indicated that there's been some hint that the federal government may move on a longstanding request we've got for double up of the gas tax funds, which is helpful. But one of the things I pointed out, because other mayors were saying that, you know, that's a good direction to go in. One of the things I pointed out, though, is that doesn't resolve the big ticket issues, right? It would be great for us if we went from $500,000 in gas tax funds to 1.5 million, because then we can deal with some of the amenities investments we're making, our waterfront development or whatever. But if you've got a water treatment facility you need to put in, or you got a 50-year-old rec center that you need to do a complete rework of, we're not going to get an order of magnitude on gas tax funds to be able to support projects of that scale. You still have to have infrastructure funding at that scale. And to Councillor Roodenburg's point, one of the concerns we've got is if they come in on the gas tax funds only and say triple our gas tax funds as a community of 10,000, they may think they're done. And that would be a big concern. So we have to, it was a real eye-opener for me to think about, we need to be careful what we ask for. I do think they need to top up the gas tax funds and give us that continued flexibility, but we can't lose sight of the fact they got to fix this big infrastructure funding program too. So I think the letter that we'll send will give some context, but it'll also give some history of our lack of success on this, and you know, beg the question of, if we're not getting this money, there's something seriously wrong with the program, right? Councillor Paul.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to suggest that we copy the UBCM and particularly the North Central Local Government Association, because really it's the rural communities, and there are no large cities within the NCLGA catchment area, and I think that they need to be brought on board.
No, that's a good point, and absolutely we copied them. Any other comments or questions on this? So on the motion to craft a carefully worded letter to the Premier and the Prime Minister, copying, and I would copy FCM too, because FCM's been on this infrastructure thing. So NCLGA, UBCM, and FCM. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, thank you for that, and thank you for the discussion. Okay, and then moving on to bylaws. And so bylaw 1887, 5-year financial plan to 2020 to 2024, first, second, third, and final adoption. Can I have the votes? I'm going to ask just for an opposition. Councillor Paul. Okay. Oh, sorry, my mistake. I moved too fast. Go ahead. Councillor Paul, Councillor Elliott, and Councillor Vic. I saw both their hands go up. I just didn't articulate it. So those are the moves and seconder. Councillor Paul in opposition. The bylaw 18888, the 2020 tax rate, first, second, third, and final adoption. First and second, mover and seconder. Councillor Elliott, so moved. Seconder. I can't see a hand. Councillor Roodenburg. Anyone opposed? Councillor Paul. Thank you. And no changes to upcoming meetings, no changes to committee appointments, announcement of future events. Are there any? Do we have any? No, just kidding. Councillor Roodenburg.
I just wanted to, on the resolution to write the letter to the Prime Minister, et cetera, and UBCM, can I suggest that you CC it to the Community Economic Development Committee of UBCM also? So
Sure.
that committee sees it, not just UBCM?
Point of order, Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
that item's already passed.
Yeah.
We can't be raising new things once.
We'll nuance it. It's okay.
Okay.
It's
Sorry, I
just a
didn't
point
hear.
of order because we're well beyond that, but we'll take that into consideration.
Okay.
Announcements, future events. Councillor Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since you let Councillor Roodenburg sneak in with that one, I was going to mention that with the letter to the NCL.
No, we can't. Sorry. Send me a note. Send me a note, Councillor Paul. Okay. Yeah, because we have moved well past that business item. So no announcements, future events. The one future event that I do think is important that I'd like council to make sure they pay attention to, and that's the Premier's speech tomorrow. He is going to supposedly be indicating what the ramp up process is going to look like. So council is aware, we've had a preliminary meeting at the staff level about potential implications for parks and playgrounds and some of our sports amenities. So that dialogue internal has started. One of the areas that we're concerned a little bit about is if it requires sanitation. So for example, enabling potentially the tennis courts to come back up is a lot easier from a staff sanitation perspective than playgrounds where you're going to have to be wiping them down all the time and have to have some sanitation procedures in place. So we've done a little bit of work in advance of the Premier's announcement tomorrow, but as I'm sure you will be paying attention to that, and then we'll switch into whatever gears we need to switch into with respect to our own municipal role that we play in that. Okay, and I know we've got George on the phone and can call me tomorrow, but if there are any gallery questions. Okay, I'm not seeing it unmute. So I'd invite a motion to adjourn. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Vic. Anybody opposed to that motion? Okay, thanks everybody, appreciate it. And thanks for bearing with our Zoom meetings. We're slowly figuring it out.